right. Good afternoon, everyone, for a nice afternoon live stream, and good afternoon to everyone, or good whatever, to whenever you're deciding to watch the stream. My name is Jose Vega. I am a candidate running here in the 15th Congressional District in the Bronx, and I am joined today by Robert Castle.
Hi.
Okay. Way of introduction. So Robert and I have gone together into the depths of NYCHA. We've also looked into some of the private real estate owners. We've looked into Chestnut Holdings and their influence on some of the campaigns, both local and federal elections. Their dealings with people like my opponent, Richie Torres. Robert and I went around the Bronx with the Gray Zone's Jeremy Lafredo, where we were going into public housing. We would go up and down the public housing buildings, especially the ones in the South Bronx, just knocking on doors and getting people's testimonies and experiences into it. But it was recommended to me by somebody here at the office that I should meet with John Mudd. And so as way of introduction and getting us started, I'm going to bring him up first, and then I will bring everyone else up after. So John, give us an introduction.
Hi, yes, my name's John Mudd. I've been living in New York City in Midtown, actually, since 1984. I've been part of the Midtown South Community Council since about 86. And in our pillars, we work on homelessness and housing and development issues and food issues and health issues. So it's a lot to handle. And so we've seen quite a bit, and we've been operating for a long time. And we've seen, we're fighting the developers, hard, over the Midtown development, the Penn area. We're the NYCHA, the demolition. We're fighting against the demolition of NYCHA. We're fighting, we have some reservations about the upzoning of Midtown. We know about all the other developments around the city. And we just feel that our core needs are housing that gives us stability, that gives us a way to move up and breathe if we're not cost burdened. So that's really one of the very base needs that we need to fight for, and very fiercely too, and along with our health and food, or food quality shit. Excuse me, but that's about it.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Next, I'm going to go here to Ted. Ted, hi. Thank you for coming on our program.
Hi, Jose. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So give us a little bit of an introduction.
I'm a friend of John Mudd's. John asked me to join today, and I said, okay. I'm interested to hear everybody's perspective. I have been a New Yorker for 43 years, the last 35 of those working on trying to end homelessness and increase affordable housing in the city in a variety of roles in the nonprofit government sectors. I now am assisting people to build housing for formerly homeless people that's affordable, deeply affordable, and working to see how we can solve this problem that we thought we were going to solve in a few years, 40 years ago, but now it's still there. So.
Awesome. Okay. Next, I'm going to go here to Marquise. Howdy.
Hi, how are you doing? And thank you for having me today. As was said, my name is Marquise Jenkins, and I'm a community organizer. I'm also district leader for the 74th Assembly District. I grew up in public housing. I benefited from all the great things and programs that public housing has to offer. I grew up in a family with 9 other siblings and a whole litany of nieces and nephews. So the fight for public housing is personal for me. But I also understand the value of public housing and how we have to take sort of the spirit of what it is that public housing is and translate that across the board so that public housing is affordable. Public housing, or housing in general in New York City, is affordable, right? We want to make sure that people have the right to organize. We want to make sure that people have the right to have space to organize. We want to make sure that there are job opportunities. And public housing provides that for all of the folks who live in public housing. Right now, the fight for public housing is real. There's a threat to tear down our public housing, development by development. And so I've been fighting on the front lines with public housing residents across the city for nearly 20 years, trying to protect our most precious housing stock in New York City.
All right, awesome. And then I see Renee. Oh, Renee, I think we may have lost her. Renee, are you there? Oh, yeah, I think we lost her. Oh, okay. All right. Well, hopefully she'll reconnect and then we can give her a proper introduction. But yeah, so I wanted to host you guys because I know you guys are experts in housing, and I know you probably have your finger on the pulse as to what housing is like in New York. And just before we begin, I do want to say I am a candidate, but this doesn't mean that everything I say my guests endorse, and this doesn't mean that everything they say I endorse. So, it's just a little disclaimer so people know, we're just here to have a friendly chat, and hopefully I can learn something here, which will help me shape better policies for New Yorkers going forward. But besides the point, besides that, I do just kind of want to open it up here. I'll go one by one. We'll start with Marquise, then we'll go to John, and then Ted. What is the state of housing right now? And is there any upside? Is there any real optimism, or can we look for an optimistic solution coming from the government right now, whether if it's like local, statewide, or federal?
I would say, right, that there is two major efforts going on. There is an effort by all levels of government to get out of providing housing to those who are in most need. And there is too much influence from the private real estate industry in the overall housing market. What we have, particularly in public housing, is we have valuable land, waterfront property, property that is accessible to transportation. And we have a government that is making a political decision not to fund public housing. And what that means is that we have nearly 500,000 residents in New York City. Roughly about 1 in every 13 resident in New York City is a public housing resident who is suffering because of the conditions of their homes. These political decisions mean that residents are living with mold in their homes, with lead in their homes, with pests, and all of these things have a direct impact on people's health. And so again, right, I love the program and the spirit of public housing, but we need to continue to put pressure on our elected officials to adequately fund public housing. And again, to translate these programs that we have across the board. No resident, for example, in New York City should be paying more than 30% of their income. In fact, we should lower that 30%. Those are the type of values that we have in public housing that should be spread across the board.
Okay. Ted? Oh, sorry. Or John. I mean, this can be informal, but yeah.
I'm looking for 23% and not 30%. Yeah, we're being stripped away. Everything's being stripped away, and you can see it with our food systems, our health systems, and it's a fight for survival. It's an existential threat, and that's not hyperbolic. We're in serious trouble, and we have to find the intersect where we intersect and demand our basic needs. We need to really come together on this issue, protect our rent controlled and rent stabilized. They're being stripped away year by year. Over 50% of people are cost burdened. It's just getting worse. Some of these proposals they put out, they're developed by the developers. Our city really doesn't rely on, they, like Marquis said, he said everything perfectly. They run the show, and that's what we have to really fight against. There's some excellent people working in these agencies, and they're hampered in a lot of ways, and we need to come together and take charge. We're not going to get it through some of these politicians. Maybe on the very basic level, like the council folks, is where we can challenge them and we can move them. if we get together as a team.
Ted?
I agree, Marquise. I think it should go down to 25%. It was at 25% of income a long time ago, and they moved it up to 30%. And I always found that to really be indefensible. It's hard enough to make ends meet as it is for people, and being cost burden, and the number of people that are cost burden now, as John says, 50% of New Yorkers in the rental market are paying more than 30% of their incomes towards housing costs, and an enormous number of them are paying more than 50% of their income.
It's me.
I think we lost
Starting
that too.
life in. I think that, you know, there are a lot of bad landlords and rapacious developers, but at the same time, I think that the housing market is the housing market, and it takes a lot of finance to build housing. There's a lot of risk taken. This can be mitigated by government-run affordable housing programs, by nonprofit developers. Everybody has a role to play. I think that right now we need to take a global look at the dysfunctional housing market that we live in here in New York City, and figure out ways to mitigate the harms that it's doing to people in public housing and affordable housing arena, in the market, rent stabilized housing and market rate housing. And that's a very difficult thing to achieve. Everybody's struggling with it all over the country, all over the world, and it's not an easy problem to fix, and it's a local problem, but it has global economic structural issues that are affecting it, and it's frustrating to watch, because, you know, many of us have spent our lives working on this, and it's gotten worse than ever. It's a supply and demand issue. We don't have enough housing. There are a lot of nuances to that about what kind of housing we should be building, and how we should be building, and how we should be financing it to solve that problem. But it's one of the major issues affecting New Yorkers, and I'm hoping that the next mayor puts it on the front burner and really focuses on doing that.
So, well, thank you. Go ahead, Robert. You had something?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's just when we were looking into we had people approach Jose's campaign as we were doing work in the streets and putting his name out there. And, you know, that's exactly what we found, is that when we started looking into these seemingly very local problems of, you know, just the worst kinds of living conditions and extractive lease agreements, as soon as we started trying to look into what were the causative factors, who was actually involved, it was very clearly it was an international phenomenon. This entire real estate industry, like you're saying, Ted, I think that's definitely the experience that we had. So on the one hand, it became a challenge as to how you would actually approach that with local levels of resources. But I do think that I think there is a kind of a small or a kind of paradoxical hope, is that my understanding is that you have to look at the financial system as a whole if you want to actually address these systemic issues, you know, and like that's one of the things that was kind of controversial about Jose's campaign, that we would talk about things like housing, but we were really insisting on talking about the financial crisis that the entire country is going through, and you know, something like the need to reinstate Glass-Steagall, you know, the Banking Separation Act that FDR had put in place to make financial private speculation with publicly held debt to cordon off the banks to cordon off commercial banks from public banks. I think that's the kind of policy that you could really get people behind if they understood that, that something like that is necessary if you're ever going to really address the root causes of these the problems in the real estate industry and other things. But
well, it might be a little more simpler. If you get into, you can get into the weeds going in a lot of different direction with financing. But if you take, like, there's a lot of models around the world, and if you take public housing itself and take that model and change it, maybe put it into the residents' hands, control, because what they're doing, they've been shorting the maintenance issues for a long time, ever since it's been built. And I think you have to decide on what kind of housing perspective that we can all agree upon, and then demand different ways of financing it. I mean, if Ted knows better than I do about financing and about nonprofit, and he's got some excellent things he's been working on, and Marquis knows better than I do about resident management and how that might take place. And we've discussed these in forums. So I'll leave it up to these two guys to maybe pick up on that.
Just real quick, I do see Renee. Renee, I'm gonna bring you up now. I want to. Can you hear us, Renee?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you give us just a quick introduction?
My name is Renee Kitt. I'm a resident of public housing, and I'm also now the resident association president of the Elliott Chelsea houses. Of the 3 developments that are proposed for demolition by related companies, and Essence Development in New York.
Hey, great. Also, I'm happy to see some chat engagement here. RBN fam representing in the chat. Thank you kindly for that. All right, and so your Chelsea housing, this is the one that's being threatened to be demolished, right? That's
Elliott Chelsea, yes.
Wow. Yeah, see, I remember, John, one of the things that you had invited us to come to was the outdoor event that you had organized, where you had musicians come in. I was part of one of the choruses that had sang. It was to bring awareness to this company Vornado, right? That was the one that was threatening to shut this down. Yeah. But you might be able to tell us a little bit more, Renee.
Well, that's the Penn Station area. What happened with us is that there is a proposed demolition. Allegedly, there was a survey saying that the residents want a demolition, except that's not what happened. There was a survey, or what Simon Kowitzi has called a temperature check, where they were asking about new construction and rezoning. Somehow that is turned into a demolition proposal. We have not asked for a demolition. We have 949 signatures that specifically state we are against the demolition. So yes, we are Elliott, Chelsea, and Chelsea Addition. There is Fulton Houses. We are 3 of the 4 developments threatened with a demolition proposal. We have not asked for it. We do not want it. Our elected officials are not listening to their constituents. Maybe we're not the constituents they want to be a holding to. So it's more or less right now a fight against our elected officials, a fight against Essence Development, a fight against the mayor, the borough president, and also, as I said, our elected officials and everyone who thinks this is a good idea. It is not. We are already a mixed income community. We are a diverse community. We are an intergenerational community. So even though Lisa Bova Hyatt, Jamie Rubin have said this is a scalable, duplicable model that can go throughout New York, we do not agree with that. It is not a good model. It destroys communities and people, and it should not be done. What should be done is a reinvestment in public housing under Section 9. That's where we need to start. Also, NYCHA needs to deal with their vacant apartment issue. That's 8,000 apartments that can change people's lives. This is home. Home is stability. It is family. It is not having to deal with issues such as food and transportation. This is how important it is to us. And that, more than anything, is what must be put forth as the solution to so many problems.
Why are there vacant NYCHA apartments?
Allegedly, they do not have money to fix them. They don't have enough people. There should not be. Apartments have been empty for thousands, let me put it tactfully, um, I should say thousands of days, but years. They have just sat vacant. This also affects people's health. Part of the reason an apartment is clean, there are people there. So they say they don't have enough money, they don't have enough people. But if you prioritize getting people housing and homes, this is what needs to be prioritized. You need to deal with the vacant apartments within NYCHA. You need to deal with the abandoned and boarded up and painted over apartments throughout this city. When you walk in this city, that is what you see. They're being boarded up, pretty up, painted over, and you can't tell that that is a vacant building. It is. So that's our issue. It is not, people say we need to build more housing. We have been doing that for half a century. We have failed. We need to invest in our housing, invest in our infrastructure. That's what we do. If we cannot do that, we will continue to be an abstract failure. It is not building housing. We have done that. You're building luxury housing. A low income housing is anyone who earns 46 to about $87,000. That's low income. That is ridiculous. So we need to stop saying we need to build housing. We need to be very realistic, or are we only about to house certain people? And that's the real problem we're at. We have been deemed not the people who should live here in Chelsea anymore.
Now, so then, and it doesn't just have to be Renee responding to this, but you are provoking a lot of questions out of me. Like, so the city of Yes, the whole plan is to build more housing, right? Because you're going to take like low density zones and then put in big apartment buildings, right? Like that's the plan, right? Because they just want to build more housing supposedly. But what you're saying is that, well, there's already 8,000 vacant apartments that just need to be repaired. So maybe rather than putting the money into building up new buildings that are kind of flimsy, by the way, because my mom lives in the New York City lottery housing thing, right? So
I'm sorry.
even though they pay very little in rent, like the other day, and this happens frequently, Robert knows, like the sink clogs up. We've had leaks from our ceiling, and this is a building that was supposedly built back in 2010, 2010, right? So it's supposed to be a relatively new building, and yet it has all these problems. So I see your point. Like, well, why not just invest in the housing that is existing now and just rebuilding it, repairing it, and making it so that it's actually livable, because there's already vacant apartments.
Right. But it's going to have to be more than that. I mean, it's not just NYCHA. We have other people warehousing apartments as well. So I always say what's happening in NYCHA is happening everywhere. Rent stabilized, rent control. We have bigger apartments than other people do, even though people do not realize that. But if you walk into our apartments, you realize the size. As time has gone on, they expect people to live in smaller and smaller apartments. So yeah, don't build cheap stuff made of sheetrock, which we see all the time, and we understand that's what you're doing. So yeah, I say it's not just NYCHA. I say you need to stop warehousing apartments throughout this city. Do a pied-à-terre tax as well. Those are various issues and things that can be done. But if you're just going to keep building and you don't put in affordability, and even affordability is a joke. There's no such thing as affordable housing. It's an embarrassment. When $37,000 is what is earned in the Bronx, and you start an apartment that someone has to earn 100,000, who is this for? Are you really pushing people out until Westchester? Because that's what I really think you're doing. You're moving people out further and further away. You're going to have a way of getting people in and out, but you just don't want us to live here. And that needs to be stopped. We need to deal with the issue. And we need to, as I said, reinvest in all sorts of housing, not just NYCHA, but everyone should pay at least good 25% of their income for housing. And so that's how I stand. I do not want my home demolished, but at the same time, I want people to have their homes themselves. And I want people to be accountable. And I mean a lot of landlords. They've been getting away with everything, and that's something that needs to stop.
Do other people have any responses here? They want to jump in?
Yeah, it happens so much in small tenement buildings. I can't believe how many people come to me for support. And I just, this is from a housing that's supposed to be for affordable too. And the elderly lady, she was been pushed out of her home for 5 years now. There was a leak, and she was put into a small unit. And basically, they want the larger apartment is what they want, and so she's been forced to live in this small efficiency apartment. And we're about a week or so, she'll be back in her own home. We went to court and we fought, with the HPD's help, and we were able to put her back in her home. This happens all the time, and they're doing it here in this building. I can tell you about so many instances with people who live here, including myself. And the affordability is a real joke, and there's so many other support, kinds of housings we need, supportive, which is also a Ted's forte. And I'll leave it at that for the others to respond.
Marquise, Ted, either of you want to jump in here?
So, I mean, I'll jump in. I mean, what we're all talking about, quite frankly, is a fundamental shift in thinking and operating. When we look at housing as a commodity, then it's all about the highest bidder. Again, this is not really an issue about scarcity. We have enough funds through the taxes that we pay, and we have the means to build enough housing for every homeless person here, right? But we have to rethink about how we prioritize our budgets on the city level, on a state level, and on a federal level. There are conscious decisions that are being made to defund and to create scarcity so that they can increase the value, and quite frankly, so that they can determine who gets to be where.
Yeah,
and that's the scary part.
It's very controlled. And I would add a little bit of nuance there. We've got about 988 rent controlled and rent stabilized together approximately, and we're losing them. So, and they're being pushed out because the landlords want that apartment. They want to raise the rents. They want to decontrol the apartments. So we do need some apartments. I believe we do need to build. Okay, but there is a huge amount that are being held off the market, and I think. But when I talk about building, we need something for the lower income folks. That's where we need to kind of grow our base like a tree. You fertilize the ground and let it grow. Okay, it's not going to solve anything by taking and giving credits to developers to build because they're not really interested. They've been prejudiced. They've worked their little games. I mean, in these 20%, 25% or whatever it is, it's supposed to be affordable and supposed to be available, and they bastardized and really butchered the word affordable. And anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Well, no, I think. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I mean, I want to go back to what I initially said, right? In public housing, whatever your income is, right? Whether you make $1 a year or whether you make $100,000 a year, you pay 30% of your income. And to me, while we want to get that 30% down as low as we can, the idea that rent is tied to your income, again, is something that should be spread across the board. Those who make more during a certain time of their life or a certain time during the year can ideally pay a little bit more in rent. And those who are struggling may have lost their job, shifted in income, maybe they can't afford to pay as much. But if we are looking at how do we tailor a program that is unique to the circumstances of individuals, public housing has provided a model that we, I believe, need to build on top of.
Yeah, I mean, here in the South Bronx, maybe you guys know about it, but like way on the bottom of the South Bronx. They're building up luxury apartments. And this is like this is the poorest congressional district in the country. And so I'm just thinking, okay, well, the housing is being built, but like, who is it meant for? You know what I mean? Like, who is this for? You're muted, Renee, if you're trying to talk. Let me. I think I can't unmute you. You got to unmute yourself. Yeah. If you were trying to respond, Renee.
Yeah, because I see that all the time. I actually farm in the Bronx, so I'm seeing all the luxury housing going up, and it just amazes me. I realize people are going to be pushed out. People I've known a long time. They've made their lives in the Bronx. They've helped make it habitable. They stayed when other peoples were fleeing, and now they're on the verge of being pushed out because they can't afford it. Because you see all this luxury housing coming, but it's also not filled. So who is it being built for? I agree with that as well. Also, you're getting rent. Public housing gets rent. We do pay rent. So why isn't part of that rent being put back into the housing, being maintaining your infrastructure? Everyone says NYCHA doesn't have money. Why did it give people who don't have money, don't give money to other things? I mean, they gave the NYCHA board approved $15 million going to the Preservation Trust. If they don't have money, why would they do that? So that's another argument. I don't believe NYCHA doesn't have money, and if it doesn't, then why aren't they suing the 700 light bulb people? So everyone knows about the big bust, everyone makes sure. So if that was done illegally, which we all know it was, then they should be suing people for compensation. So do they have enough money that they don't need to do that? I don't think so. So my attitude about everyone thinking public housing is a bust or NYCHA is a bust is you need to change the administration. You need to get them out. We don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Or as I say, we haven't thrown away this government, even though we might disagree with who's at the head of it. You need to get new management who actually cares about the people, who actually cares about the apartment, who do not see it as a real estate investment and do not see its tenants as the people they will be making bank off of. That's very important in this continuing struggle on housing.
Yeah. Ted, is there anything you wanted to add?
I'm not sure there's much I can add to that. I mean, we have a housing shortage, and it is important to build more housing because there's just not enough. And housing has become very expensive to build and very expensive to operate. NYCHA has a lot of money, but at the same time, it's very expensive to run old buildings. And NYCHA also has a management and employee structure with, that is not as efficient as it could be. And so that's making it very difficult for NYCHA to cover its cost and to maintain its buildings properly. And part of that is because the federal government doesn't support NYCHA in the way that it originally did, and in all public housing authorities across the country. And that has been going on for a very long time. And we are seeing its effects in buildings that are, have not been maintained properly. And that has caused many of our current problems.
So I remember when Robert and I and Jeremy Lafredo were going around the Bronx, we went to the public housing. And I mean, I saw all kinds of stuff. Like, for example, there was one elevator for 20 floors or something ridiculous like that. And there was lines of people waiting to get in the elevators, and you don't know when it's going to come up or down. And, it's a shame that the federal government isn't supporting NYCHA because, I actually learned from Richie Torres watching his old interviews when he was still running for city council that if NYCHA was its own city, it would be like one of the largest cities in the United States. Right, which you would think would
largest city, to be exact.
third.
Again, man, like there's nearly 400,000 individuals that live in public housing. The issues that we talk about in public housing are extremely complex. No one in their right mind with two functioning eyes can argue about the condition of public housing. oftentimes what we're struggling with is what is the solution to address the problems in public housing. And our government on all three levels would rather give our public housing to the private sector. And that is what we are fighting. That's what we are fighting against. Our government has the funding. As Renee actually pointed out, it decided to put 15 million towards the Public Housing Preservation Trust. In Mayor Adams' first term, he decided to put $2 billion into the RAD program. Right. So we know that the money is there, but we're dealing every time we talk about the roaches, the rats, the mold, and all the issues that live in public housing, we have to speak about it with nuance because the response that we get when we talk about those issues is that we need to find money, and oftentimes the only way they can find money is the private sector. But that in itself is a sham because when we hand over the developments to the private developers, guess what? They're not pouring in their own money and equity. What they're doing is they're taking out mortgages on the property. And that's what makes it more scary. So, yes, we want our home fixed. Yes, we want it repaired. And yes, we need our government to give us adequate funding. But if we continue to go down the narrative of just talking about the issues, then it makes it easier for the housing authority and for our elected officials to say, let's hand this over to the private sector because they will do a better job. And in reality, they're using government funding and with this, and they're taking out loans. And so, sorry, the last point, and I'll finish with this. The reason that we are where we are with public housing, quite frankly, it's because of racism. It's because of the type of people who live in public housing, right? And if that is the case, and if you can agree with me on that, what's to say that the same financial cuts won't happen to the Section 8 program? And what makes matters worse is if they decide to cut the Section 8 program, then what we face is foreclosure in public housing because not only can we not afford to do the repairs, but now we can't afford to pay back the loans that they've taken out using the property as collateral. So I want to make it clear when we talk about the issues in public housing, it's very complex and it's more about how we solve the problem than it is about describing what the problems are because we all know, whether you live in public housing or not, exactly what the problems are in public housing.
Sure. Robert, did you want to react to this?
Well, I mean, it's that description of the problem seems to me, again, not to just generalize things, but there's a very large, I think there is a very large trend in the entire country towards sort of privatizing the public sector, and the way that you just gave an account of what's happening with NYCHA, it just strikes me that, again, at least part of one route for actually organizing a solution is to try to raise awareness about these systemic problems in the financial system that we're living under. So anyway, that's just a general point, but
no, I agree. I think it's like, this whole thing about how they're just taking out mortgages. I mean, it's all just like a way of using housing as a way to just make some people rich and with no care or regard for the actual people living in these houses, right? It's all just about profit incentive, and it's about, how much money can you actually make off of people rather than caring about their conditions. So it would, seem to me that the natural question is then, well, and you're right, we can't just keep describing the problem. At some point we have to have a solution. So, what is it exactly that the government as a whole is doing right now that it should change? For example, why are we seeing housing in the way that why does the government see housing the way it does when it should be seen in a way that's more people-centered, more of something that can actually help people?
Well, one of the things I can say is I agree with Marquise when he says it needs to be nuanced, but you need to look at the history of this country as well. Government transaction of land has always been what this government has done. It's taken from one people to another. So it's a mindset change as well that has to happen. You know, people say, well, public housing is this, public housing is that. Public housing, as Marquis says, has its embedments in structural racism. It was originally built for the white working class. People do not know that, people do not acknowledge it, but that's who it was built for. Over time, the disinvestment happened when it went from one group of people to another. But we have to have nuance. What the government can do, it's what we are, the government. It's not the elected officials, it's not all these other people. We are the government. So, what we need to do is start investing in people. What we need to do is add a body to let people know this is what we consider to be important. What some people need to do is actually run for office. What we need to do is have a collective attitude and morals and ethics that housing is a human right. Not just say it, but actually live that, actually breathe that, actually acknowledge how important housing is. Not siloing different people from different housing. Section 8 here, Section 9 here, community land trust here, resident management companies here. We all need housing. We all need to start to work together as a collective whole. Yes, public housing is a model that should be used, but we all need to make a decision how much housing we need. Do we only need luxury housing? What are we willing to fight for? And what is the change we need to see? We have to do that.
I agree with about 99% of that. You can almost see the confiscating of land. You can relate that to where? Palestine. If we want to take a step overseas, but that's a whole different conversation. And you know as well as anybody, Jose, you're running as an independent, how much of a force there is to deal with in the government, and how you know I see it as a one-party system, and I see them working within a system we've been under for a long time, and that's our economic system, and that's our capitalist system. So that's a big mountain to climb, to think you're going to get enough people in the government to change things. I think it has to be from the ground. It has to be a groundswell of people, and it's maybe it has to implode before it gets better. I don't know.
I agree. I hope not, but anyway, Marquis and or Ted.
I mean, that question, I guess, is what's been keeping us going, all this time. What is the role of the government? And it's simple. It's adequate funding, as Renee put it, and we have to hold the electeds accountable. We have to become the electeds to make that decision, and it's oversight. One of the biggest, right? Like we all know about the bribery that was going on and the scandals and all of that, right? But there's been no real oversight on how the housing authority is utilizing the funds, how it is utilizing its buying power. Right? Like the public housing authority has 176,000 units. They have the influence to get companies and industries to be creative and imaginative, fixing our ventilation systems, right? Like they can work with one company to change the way we air flows through apartments. They can change the way heating is done in our apartments. That there's so much buying power and influence that the housing authority has that is not utilizing. Elevators. The housing authority has thousands of elevators. We spent millions of dollars on bringing in new elevators when all we had to do was utilize the warranty on those elevators. So we lost millions of dollars simply because we didn't utilize the warranty. So we have to spend the money that we have wisely, and we have to make sure that we're continuing to fund public housing adequately. Going all the way back to the Reagan era, there has been defunding of public housing from all three levels of government. The hardest battle that we have, we talk about the federal government's responsibility. New York City is the largest public housing authority in the entire country. And we're dealing with other states who have gotten rid of all of their public housing. So when we go to the federal government and we ask the federal government for money, how do we convince those Congress people to put money into public housing when they no longer have public housing in their district?
Well, I think that you've hit it on the head, Marquise. I mean, there's a political problem in Washington in that it's really just a handful of states that really care and prioritize public housing. I'm sure that Congressman Torres is fighting for funding for public housing in Washington, but it's him in Massachusetts and California and Illinois. I mean, and there's all these other states and congressmen and senators that this is not a priority for them when they're looking at budget priorities. And so it's been impossible for anybody to get public housing funded at the level that is required. And I know that we've been trying to solve this problem for a very long time. Politically in Washington, we have been hitting a brick wall over and over again. The packed RAD conversions of public housing, Section 9 public housing into project-based Section 8 refinancings with bonds and everything like that. That is a workaround that people devise to try to bring investment into public housing. I think that it showed promise. It has its pitfalls, and it brings in private developers. And if you bring in the wrong private developer, you're going to have real problems. One that doesn't listen to tenants, you're going to have real problems, as we see at Elliott and Fulton Elliott Chelsea Housing. But at the same time, it is a method to bring investment into housing so that you can fix things up and you can run things properly. It's not perfect, but that was the solution that some people came up with because they couldn't get Section 9 public housing properly funded.
Well, let me make some corrections. Fulton and Elliott Chelsea are not under PACT or RAD. What they are doing, we are still under Section 9, and they are proposing to demolish us because we will be used to fund NYCHA itself. That's what it is. We are a funding stream because we live in some of the most valuable property in this city. That's of course much of NYCHA is now in some of the most very, how should I say, hot opportunity zones in this city. So that's what it is. We are not here to be used for that. At this point in our history, we should stop using people who are Black, brown, and Asian to make wealth off of them. So we are not under PACT or RAD. We have not been given the demolition disposition. Section 18 has not happened for Fulton and Elliott Chelsea. This was a decision by the Chelsea NYCHA working group to put us into this. It has failed. We've seen by Brad Lander's report that those who go under PACT have a higher rate of eviction. And we've seen by the last Public Housing Committee on Public Housing hearing on February 26, oversight of NYCHA RAD, that there is no oversight, that NYCHA walks away. So this issue has not worked. What we need is a moratorium on that. We need to figure out something that works. We need reinvestment by the city or state. The Chelsea houses of Elliott Chelsea houses did have a funding stream, lower income housing tax credit along with the Section 8. That was there. One thing we're saying is RAD PACT has not worked. And so there needs to be a moratorium on that because now we are in danger of a demolition because of this issue. That's what needs to be dealt with. And a lot of other developments as well are in constraints. They are asking for help. No one is doing anything properly. The construction or rehabilitation in some instances is not being done properly.
Mm.
So we can't just say it's rad and yes, that was brought in as that, but we're also seeing it has not worked as well.
Yeah,
So we
purposely.
do also need a commitment to Section 9 public housing. We need a commitment on the city, state, and federal level. They all need to start working together. And that's one of the things that we would like to happen.
Section 8, quite frankly, was the first attack on public housing by the private sector. It was the first way in which they were able to take government dollars, housing dollars, and filter them into the private sector. But again, in focusing on what are the solutions, and let's be clear, there's not a one size fit all solution for all of these developments. But when we think about the role of the federal government and how do we convince the federal government to allocate funds, New York should have the right to say, you know what, whether the federal government has Section 8 dollars available or Section 9 dollars available, we should be able to tap into both of those pots of money and say, okay, we want to apply these dollars to Section 9. We should not be up against every other congressional leader that doesn't have public housing in their district fighting for the same pots of money. The federal government is deciding where it wants to put its money. So if we can get rid of sort of these two buckets and allow every state to access housing dollars and utilize those housing dollars in a way that makes the most sense for each state, then we're not constantly having this battle. We also need to put more pressure on our state government. Our governor paid nearly $2 billion for a football stadium that only gets used 4 times a year. So it is always political, and how this country, how this state, and how this city decides to utilize this money. It's always going to be a twofold problem. We need adequate funding and we need adequate oversight. The last thing I'll say about solutions is we have to think about resident control. That is looking at the model of land trust, community land trust, and that's looking at resident management. But before we can get to those two places, which is, in my opinion, is the ideal, we have to bring all of these buildings up to code. We can't hand over property that needs billions of dollars in repairs and say, residents here, you take over it.
So I'm going to let you guys have the last word. I'm just going to kind of give you how I see it, just because we're coming up on time. And you're also welcome to defer if you feel like you've already said what you wanted to say. No problem. Don't feel like you have to say something else. But if somebody's running for federal office, it's my job to take into consideration not just the housing, of course, but I see stuff like hospitals in New York City are getting closed down. Schools in the Bronx and also all over New York City are getting closed down. I think 13 Catholic high schools have just closed down in the last 2 years. And I'm seeing, here in the Bronx alone, there's been 3 Catholic high schools that have been announced are going to be shut down. We're seeing just a general trend of poverty continuing to increase and people getting pushed out, and only, people who can afford to live in New York City coming in. And even then they're living in these sheetrock buildings, like you said. So even they're getting the short end of the stick. They just don't feel it right now. This is why I really appreciate listening to all of your solutions and your ideas, because I have to keep a bigger picture, especially if I'm going to be representing this district and also the country as a whole. One of the things that Richie Torres ran on, why he ran for Congress, was he said in his pitch, well, I was a council member, but now the next step to make sure that housing can be, in the New York City area, in the country, is so that I get into the federal government. And I mean, we've seen what a failure that is, because this guy mentions Israel 236% more times than he does the Bronx, and this guy is completely just bought and paid for by special interests. I don't think he's ever done anything for housing while he's been in Congress, just put in, smoke detectors, and smart thermometers. That's about it. I mean, I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, someone should correct me on this, but, anyway, that's just how I see it. And that's my last word. I'm going to pass it off to you guys. And I'll go first, Renee, Marquise, John, and Ted. So in that order, you can give me your final thoughts as we close out.
Reinvest in housing on all levels, city, state, and federal, something Marquis says. Everyone needs its bucket. We shouldn't be fighting against each other. Housing is not a silo. We all need it. Housing is a human right.
Okay. Marquise?
Again, I'm just gonna piggyback off of what Renee said. If we're all in this together, then we have to think about how do we then take our ideas and make them real through our elected officials. And that means putting out real demands and holding them accountable. We no longer need to say to our elected officials, what are you going to do for us? But more along the lines of, here's a job description. Do you qualify? Can you meet all of the criteria and requirements on this job description if you want this job? Oftentimes, we have been settling for what they give us as opposed to being truly in charge of the process. That is the way we shift the balance. That's the way we shift the focus. And that is the way we make our political system and our entire ecosystem resident centered and resident led.
John?
Yeah, I definitely agree with solidarity, and I agree with working for the ground up. And we have to set the standards, and we have to work to get those folks in office that agree with our, I don't know, 10 commandments or whatever it is, or principles, or social contract. And we have to demand a better social contract. But looking at it with our health issues and how the corporate takes over the healthcare system, and how we've been fighting so hard to get a Medicare for all. It's daunting, and we were pushing very, very hard just to get a signature on a bill 1096 to protect the retirees from their so they can keep their traditional health care. So you can see a lot of, even on the very ground level and right in the community boards, they're packing the community boards with developer friendly folks. This is all in every aspect of our government. We have private interests, and that's what we're battling. So if you're thinking you're going to force the politicians to do what you want, it's a fierce battle, and it's going to be hard on the higher levels, but on the ground level, I think that's where we can be effective, and maybe change from the ground level and let it grow upward. That's the only way I see it. I even heard from a lot of people that are very active nationally. They said, they don't see things changing, and they feel it's on the ground level. So I'm hearing this from a lot of different activists, and it is about us discovering what we want and driving the train, not thinking, pushing them to do the right thing. We have to find a model. We have to get into the financials. We have to decide how this might work, and there's a lot of folks that we can align ourselves with to do that, I think, and that's why I appreciate all the folks that I get connected with, and I appreciate these folks for being on here with me, and I appreciate meeting you, Jose.
This is about power, and the only thing that can beat money is organizing. And so I really appreciate what Renee and Marquise and John are doing to bring this fight to government and to speak truth to power. And you just got to keep on hammering away and get your word out, and hopefully you'll get some victories. We'll all get some victories, and we'll see public housing saved. We'll see better quality public housing. We'll see proper maintenance of public housing, and we'll see those communities thriving again.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming on. Just before I go, Renee, somebody in the chat is asking if you have any contact information, email, or some way to reach you.
StopFECdemolition@gmail.com or ElliotChelseaHouses@gmail.com.
Okay. Well, there you have it, folks. And if I don't know if anyone else wants to throw in an email or something.
Sure. John Mudd, Midtown South Community Council. That's John at midtownsouthcc.org. And feel free to connect with me and check the things out we do on the web and get involved.
Great. All right. Marquise, anything you want to share?
Yes, you can reach me at Marquise, that's MARQUIS, j2@gmail.com. And I look forward to continuing this conversation with you all.
Absolutely. And Ted?
I'm just a civilian, so you don't need to. I'm not going to be able to do much to help you, but I work closely with John and the Midtown South Community Council, and that's certainly the best way to reach me is through
All right.
John.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for tuning in and coming on. And